Hello Year 10 and welcome back to week 3 of distance learning, and we are still on the topic B7 ecology, looking at the factors which reduce biodiversity. So straight into the title today. Biology books open, get that title written and the date written please. Now the concept of biodiversity is an area being biologically diverse. Okay, you'll notice in this topic there's quite a few times when we put bio in front of one of the words. Okay, so to have a very diverse area means there's lots of variety of different things living in that area. Bio, we're talking about the biological things in that area, so we're talking about the plants, the animals, all the different things that live there. And biodiversity is really good for keeping a stable community, because it means that if something happens to one thing in that environment, the other things don't really get that heavily impacted by it. Okay, so there's lots of things that humans are doing that reduce biodiversity. We're going to talk about those today. Next lesson, we're going to talk about what can be done or what is being done to try and improve, maintain, build back that variety, that biodiversity. Okay, so title written, what factors reduce biodiversity, and we're writing the date as well. Okay, so like I just said, I would take from this slide whatever notes you feel you need to. Okay, biodiversity is the variety of all the different species of organisms on Earth or within an ecosystem within a particular area. Okay, so that is definitely worth writing down. A great biodiversity ensures the stability of ecosystems. I just said that about stable communities by reducing the dependence of one species on another for food, shelter and the maintenance of the physical environment. Okay, so you might want to simplify that slightly, or you could just write it as is. Many human activities are reducing biodiversity, and only recently have measures been taken to try and stop this reduction, and that's what we're talking about next lesson. Now this lesson might feel like it's quite long. We've got to review a couple of videos which I've put into the playlist, the Year 10 double science distance learning folder and the Year 10 triple science distance learning folder, so have a look at that to watch those two videos. I'll let you know when to watch those. Okay, so taking notes from this page, if you need extra time then pause now. Okay, so we don't need to draw this as a grid, we can have this just as a bullet point list. I'm going to talk about each of these things and then we're going to try and summarise a key point about the, kind of to get the key message across from each of these sections. So we're talking about waste from human activities. So human activities, we've got this massive growing population, we're creating a lot of waste and we're looking at how that impacts our environment. So we're looking at the left hand side first, which is the water pollution section, and it says sewage. Now I've seen this as a 6 marker a couple of times now, and it's quite a tricky one to get your head around if you don't think it through. Okay, so sewage goes into, this could be that the water treatment plant hasn't treated the sewage properly, or there's been a sewage dumping from somewhere, or it's come off of some fields and gone into the river, whatever. Okay, so there's sewage pollution in the river, and that sewage brings with it lots of bacteria, and the bacteria feed on the sewage, so the bacteria populations rise, and because they're feeding on the sewage and they are respiring aerobically, they end up using all of the oxygen that's in the water. So by the time the fish try and get their oxygen by diffusing through their gills from the water, the oxygen, there's no oxygen left in the water, so the fish end up dying because there is not enough oxygen. Okay, so to summarise that, when sewage goes into the river, the number of bacteria increase, they are respiring aerobically using all the oxygen. Okay, and the impact is the death of fish. So we've got sewage goes into the river, bacteria respire aerobically, use up the oxygen and the fish die. Fertilisers. Fertilisers are designed to help plants grow. So if fertilisers get into a river or a lake, then they're going to cause all of the plants and the algae in that river or lake to start growing. As they grow, they take up all the space. They'll probably be floating where they can to the surface, blocking all of the light going further down into that area. And in taking up all the space, there just isn't enough space for other things to live there. You'd think that it would be providing more food, which could be the case, but there's not the space there because you get this kind of overwhelming mass of plants and algae. Okay. Toxic chemicals. This could be a chemical leak. It could be something like DDT, which used to be a big problem. It was a chemical which got into the water, and it's this process called bioaccumulation. This can happen with any chemical. So a relatively small amount of the chemical goes into the water, and then as it moves its way through the food chain, because the thing that's next on the food chain eats a lot of the thing before it, it builds up, it accumulates, hence the word bioaccumulation. Bio, we're throwing that word in all the time, but bioaccumulation, it builds up and kind of escalates as it goes through the food chain. Okay, so by the time it gets to something at the top, maybe that's some kind of fish that we might be eating, it can actually be at a really harmful concentration and therefore a lot more dangerous. Okay, so what could be deemed as quite nothing to worry about, not threatening concentration of a chemical in the water can then build up through a food chain, and that's called bioaccumulation. Okay, an accumulation of chemicals through a food chain. Okay, the right hand side is slightly easier to talk and write about. So reduction of land for animals and plants by building. Okay, so if there is more buildings being built, and there's greenfield sites and brownfield sites, and it's the brownfield sites that we're trying to fill up. So you see lots of houses, kind of, they knock down one house and build four, and all these different kind of housing kind of nooks are getting filled, but that's obviously reducing land for plants and animals. Quarrying does exactly the same thing, so this is blowing up rock and using that rock as a building material, so that will destroy large areas of habitat. Growing sugarcane. Now we're going to talk about this when we watch the deforestation video in a bit. Sugarcane is something where we can get bioethanol from. Okay, it is a renewable resource, so that's a good thing. We'll talk about it in more detail shortly. But we take the sugarcane and we ferment it using yeast, and as a result we get ethanol, and we can use that as a fuel. But in doing that, we have to destroy large areas of land that might have had animals on, might have been a forest. So there's pros and cons to all of these things. And then dumping waste, which kind of links in with the left-hand side there. Any kind of waste being dumped is not going to provide a nice environment for animals and plants. Okay, so we're kind of summarising what we've got here on this slide, maybe with a sentence to go with each key point. Definitely the stuff on the left hand side is really important. Stuff on the right hand side maybe a bit more common sense. Okay, if you need extra time, then pause now. Okay, we've got an exam question now. Human activities affect the environment. List A gives 4 human activities. List B gives the effect of these activities on the environment. Draw one line from each human activity in list A to its effect on the environment in list B. So maximum 4 lines here, not 5, because we're drawing one line from A to list B. So something on list B is not going to be used, okay? So probably best if we say to pause and you can write those out. Okay, so it might be a good idea now to pause. Make sure you give it a decent go. Don't just wait for the answers. Pesticides kill pests. Okay. Pause now. Okay, next part of the question then for 2 marks. Human activities are increasing global warming. Give 2 effects of global warming on the environment. Okay, we've got a 2 marker there. 2 effects of global warming on the environment. Give that a decent go. Don't just wait for the answer. If you need extra time, pause now. Okay, we've got the answers then. So, green pen's out. Digging a new quarry reduces the land available for wild animals. Spraying pesticides on crops pollutes hedges around fields. Growing rice adds methane to the atmosphere. And driving cars that release sulfur dioxide produces acid rain. And for the second question, which was 2 effects of global warming, we've got climate change, more extreme weather or changes to weather patterns, or you could describe that, things like storms and typhoons and hurricanes. Rise in sea level, I bet a lot of people wrote that one. Melting of ice caps, they kind of link together. Reduced biodiversity. Changes to migration patterns, we touched upon that in the last lesson, saying that a lot of the migratory birds now are not migrating back. And changes in the distribution of species, okay, which links in tropical diseases, and I think that covers it all. So if you need any extra time, then pause now. Okay, destruction of peat bogs. This is another thing that's affecting the environment. And we talked about the fact that when fossil fuels were formed, particularly the coal from dead trees, these dead trees kind of fell into boggy conditions and eventually over millions of years formed coal. Now, the conditions on Earth have changed quite a lot since then, so we can't form coal anymore, but we can form peat. And peat bogs are kind of really boggy areas where as trees die, they're kind of buried in there and they decompose and form this stuff called peat, which is really good to use as compost on plants and things like that. But obviously there's a massive trap there of carbon in that peat, and what people do is they actually destroy the peat bog by burning all of the peat, which releases all of that carbon as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So it's actually a really useful lock or sink of carbon that is being released into the atmosphere because they prefer to use the land to build on. Okay, so our summary is the destruction of peat bogs and other areas of peat to produce garden compost reduces the area of this habitat and therefore biodiversity. The decay or burning of peat releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And yes, this is a page where we have to write some notes, please. If you need more time, pause now. Okay, I'm just checking where I am. Okay, now this is where we're going to watch the video. It's I can't remember what it's called now, but it's after this video in the distance learning folder. Okay, and it's about deforestation. It's not very long. While you're watching it, if you can consider why has the deforestation occurred, there's the video. I can't play it on here, otherwise YouTube won't let me post this video. So that was the issue I had on my first ever video. So we're going to watch that video separately and we're going to think about these 3 questions. Why has deforestation occurred? How has deforestation changed the carbon cycle? And how has deforestation reduced biodiversity? Now within the video they keep referring to not just the orangutans but also sun bears. So at the bottom right there you can see a picture of a sun bear, so you just have an idea of what they are. Okay, and this is in Borneo. Okay, and you can see there one of the plantation fields where they are growing. In this case they're talking about palm oil, and I've also added another video for you to watch, which is the Iceland advert that was banned that talks about palm oil and looking for palm oil in our products. Okay, so there's 2 short videos for you to watch now. So have a pause of this, go and watch those 2 videos, and then come back, which is hopefully now, and let's look at these 2 questions. Why has the deforestation occurred? How has deforestation changed the carbon cycle? And how has deforestation reduced biodiversity? So it's occurred because they're using the land to grow the palm oil, okay, to grow the palms that they get the palm oil from, to use in all kinds of different products that come from our supermarkets into our homes. How has it changed the carbon cycle? Well, although they're planting more plants, which will take the carbon out of the atmosphere, in destroying it, they've got rid of all of those trees that were taking carbon dioxide in. So there's actually more carbon gone into the atmosphere or not being removed from the atmosphere as a result of the deforestation. And how has deforestation reduced biodiversity? We saw all those animals listed that were affected by the loss of the rainforest, the sun bears, the orangutans, and all the other things that were living there as they just destroyed those vast areas. So it's had a massive impact on biodiversity. Okay, so hopefully you've watched the 2 videos, we've summarised the questions, and let's move on to the next part of the lesson. If you need any extra time, pause now. Okay, so looking at this substance, sugarcane, that I talked about. So I said that sometimes those forested areas, or any area, is the original use of that land is changed to grow sugarcane. And we get this bioethanol. Again, this entire topic, let's just throw the word bio in front of everything, and we've got this bioethanol. And it's come from the sugarcane, and then yeast respire anaerobically, producing ethanol and carbon dioxide. Now, I know we talk about this in chemistry. We also talked about it in B4, which was the photosynthesis and respiration topic. And we said that it is this useful production of ethanol, which that ethanol can be used for alcoholic drinks, but it can also be used as a biofuel, okay, a renewable resource of energy. Okay, so that's why we're talking about it. So once they've undergone the fermentation process, they then distill to make the ethanol as pure as possible. Now, what's quite good about this, if we're being positive, is that it is carbon neutral. And what carbon neutral means is when it was a plant, it was photosynthesizing, therefore it was taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. When it was burned, it was releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So because it took it in and it gave it out, we say that they cancel each other out, and we call it carbon neutral. Okay, I'm not sure how many notes necessarily we need from this page. We need to know what bioethanol is. We also need to know what carbon neutral is. Okay, if you need any extra time, pause now. Okay, this is our final slide of the lesson. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of using biofuels instead of fossil fuels? Now, these biofuels could be simply biomass, which is burning of any plant material, or it could be burning of chicken poo, lots of energy in chicken poo. It could be the bioethanol that we just talked about from the sugarcane. It could be the biogas that we talked about. This was the triple science video. We talked about the anaerobic digesters. If you're not triple, don't worry about that one. So there's lots and lots of alternatives. We also talked about biodiesel. That's McDonald's filter all of their cooking oil, and then they use that biodiesel to go into the lorries. Okay, lorries, trucks. Strange, I wonder what the difference is. Who knows? So we're looking at advantages and disadvantages of using biofuels instead of fossil fuels. And here is the list that I've created. Okay, so advantages of the biofuels is that they're renewable, whereas fossil fuels are not. There's economical advantages, and there'll be more jobs because you'll have people creating the biofuels, planting the sugarcane, that kind of thing. The advantage to the environment could be seen as linking to that carbon neutral, that we're putting more plants into the ground, so they're going to be taking that carbon dioxide as they photosynthesize, and even though they're releasing it again afterwards, they're doing that positive good whilst they're in the ground as a plant. Oh, postman. Disadvantages, we've obviously got the destruction of the habitat. It could have had a better function before in terms of providing a good environment for the animals and plants that were living there. Setup costs, so you've actually got to pay the people to set it up. That links in with irrigation. That's a fancy word for watering, so all the plants are going to need watering. How are we going to get the water to them to ensure that they grow? The carbon emissions, even though they're carbon neutral, carbon emissions are still there, so we're still releasing this carbon into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, which isn't doing, in terms of global warming and the greenhouse effect, isn't doing much good. It could be that farming land is reduced because existing farming land is used up in order to grow the biofuels, which means that there are some places in the world that used to be completely self-sufficient. They didn't import food at all, and now a lot of these places that are kind of getting a little bit greedy maybe and growing the biofuels because they know they're going to get lots of money from that ethanol that they make, they're not growing crops anymore, so food is having to be imported, and the cost of that food and the food miles and the impact of the transportation that's bringing all of that food into the area, there's carbon footprint miles behind that. It's actually a negative thing, okay, because it's really important to remember that as someone who's trying to earn a living, making money from growing some sugarcane and getting the bioethanol is going to make you more money than maybe just growing some rice, okay? So you can see kind of there are these dilemmas for people in these areas where this is taking place. What do they do in terms of what's right? What do they do in terms of making money? And that kind of thing, okay? So it's quite a long lesson. Next lesson is a lot shorter because we're just going to look at what's being done to try and improve biodiversity and maintain biodiversity. So it will be a shorter one. I hope you found that quite interesting. I think it's quite an interesting topic. And I will see you again next time. Hit subscribe if you'd like to, maybe even hit share, and that would be great. Hope you have a good day. Thanks very much.